Hey everyone, I am Anika from Anika's DIY Life, and today I'm making this quirky, colorful key holder. It is like a piece of art which not only holds your keys or masks, but it also has these magnetic tiles that you can use to leave little notes or reminders. Before we get started, a quick shout out to Bernzomatic for sponsoring this project. Now let's go. Now, the first step is to make the hexagonal tiles, and I found a really cool way to make these easily on the miter saw. Let me show you. Set the saw at 30 degrees and cut off about 6 to 7 inches of a board. And be sure to save that cut off for later. I am using a 1x3 board. Mark the center of the board and cut that so that the mark is still visible. Measure the distance from the corner to the mark and transfer that to the bottom of the other side. Cut at this point as accurately as possible. Align the piece with the blade and clamp the cutoff from the first step next to it. This becomes the jig, and now you can just go ahead and cut up all the hexagons. I cut about 10 pieces to use. Next, I went ahead and sanded everything with 220 grit sandpaper. For the base, I am using a 1x10 board. The hexagons were too small, so I needed to sand them by hand. To make them magnetic, I will be embedding magnets into them. So I made holes using a Forstner bit such that about 1/4 of an inch of the thickness of the board was left behind. Now it's time to torch. I am using the BZ4500 heat shrink torch with Bernzomatic propane. But before we get started, I want to introduce you to the newest Bernzomatic product. This is the digital fuel gauge. It indicates the amount of gas left in your portable cylinder. You simply snap it on and turn it on, and it tells you how much gas you have left in the cylinder. Now this is a new cylinder. I have an older cylinder here, so let's check that out. So this one still has a little bit of gas left, so we can go ahead and use it before we safely dispose of this cylinder. Now let's get to torching. I set up all my boards and pieces on my concrete driveway. You obviously want to do this as far away from anything flammable as possible. I am using the Bernzomatic BZ4500 HS torch, which simply screws onto the Bernzomatic propane cylinder, and it has an auto ignition. There's also a continuous flame option. I went ahead and torched all the boards on all the sides. You do want to make sure that you are continuously moving the torch as you go so that you can get an even char. Also, be sure to char all the boards all around, including the hexagons. Once they were charred, I went ahead and used a sanding block to remove as much of the loose soot as I could. Then I took them all inside to attach the magnets. I simply added a strong glue and dropped the magnets inside. To clamp the magnets, I used another magnet on the outside. Once they were dry, I went ahead and figured out the arrangement that I wanted. I also made sure that there were no two adjoining hexagons with the same grain alignment. Then I just glued them to the board using wood glue and 1/4-inch spacers. To clamp them down, I just used a few heavy paint cans and allowed them to dry. Once dry, I went ahead and gave them a few coats of matte clear coat to seal it. Now that everything is dry, it is time for the epoxy. To prep, I taped all the hexagons to protect them from any stray epoxy during the pour. I also added masking tape to the back of the board to keep the drips from getting on it. I mixed up the epoxy and started the pour. I started with black in one corner. Now, at this point, for some reason, my camera stopped recording, but I added pink and then orange, gold, and then clear to create that colorful background. I gave it a minute or so to let the bubbles rise up, and then I used the Bernzomatic detail torch to pop them all. Once it was cured, I removed the masking tape, and I am so glad I decided to use it. I was able to simply take the masking tape off along with any drips of the epoxy. Then I just marked and made the holes for the hooks, added the hooks, and I added hangers on the back and hung it in the entryway. It is perfect for dropping your keys on the hooks or leaving little notes on the magnetic tiles. I hope you enjoyed this fun little colorful project. I have a whole bunch of projects using Bernzomatic torches that I will link to right here. And if you haven't yet, please go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss out any future projects.